Dude, if you had asked me before I saw this video if this was possible, I would say theoretically, but so improbable that it would classify on the border of impossible. But it turns out that we have not just one documented instance of this happening on video, but two. For those of you who are not super familiar with the terminology or just plain old new to guns, the cartridge is composed of several components, and the first most prolific one that everybody's pretty much familiar with is the bullet or the projectile that comes out of the barrel and it goes down range, does all the bad stuff. But the other components are as follows. The casing is basically the metal wrap that holds the whole thing together. Inside that casing is the propellant, also commonly referred to as the powder. That's what generates the pressure that pushes the bullet down the barrel and out and makes the thing happen with the thing. And then in the back of that casing is located the primer. And if it's center fire cartridge, which is what we're talking about here today, it's located in the center of that casing. And the primer is basically a piece of metal, usually soft metal, with a small amount of contact explosive in it that basically initiates the whole process. And basically it gets struck by a firing pin inside the gun and initiates that contact explosive, and it sets off the rest of the propellant. So the next question would be, is this dangerous? And I would say potentially dangerous, but probably not in the way that many people think. A lot of people would focus on the bullet, and I would say the bullet is the least dangerous component of all of this, because remember, it's the heaviest component of the whole equation there. Physics, equal and opposite reaction. If you got a heavy thing and a light thing, the light thing's going to move. The reason that the bullet is so effective at creating horizontal velocity is because we set that charge off inside of a firearm, and that the rest of the components have a bunch of metal wrapped around them. The bullet has just an open space in front of it, so it's going to go. In this instance, we had the bullet sitting up against a bench top, and again, it's the heaviest component, so it's basically would have to push itself through the bench top to be able to do anything. Meanwhile, that explosive that's going off is going to be pushing on the casing. So what is likely to happen here are a couple things. Either the casing would jettison itself, depending on the crimp. The primer can blow itself out, and those create quite a nice fireworks display. I've had the unfortunate pleasure of being in the vicinity of something like that happening. Particularly 50 BMG ones are really quite fun to watch from a safe distance, but that's neither here nor there. But what is most likely to happen is that casing to simply detonate. The casing is not a pressure-bearing component. Really, it's just the packaging. It's like the delivery packaging. It is simply there to deliver the rest of the components, the projectile, the propellant, and the primer in the correct orientation relative to the bore and the fire control components as to initiate the discharge. So really, its only function is a delivery mechanism. It is not meant to take the kind of pressures that are generated from burning the propellant. The reason that they come out in something other than multiple pieces when you discharge them inside their gun is they are supported by the chamber. When that primer is initiated and the propellant burns and we reach chamber pressure, that brass expands to fill the dimensions of the chamber. And then as it rapidly cools, it contracts back down and is extracted and ejected from the gun. If it wasn't for that steel that's wrapped around it, you would just simply have a ruptured case. And sometimes if you have unsupported chamber designs or you have an out of battery discharge in your firearm, you can find damaged brass. So in this instance, the casing not being supported by anything is going to rupture at a much lower pressure. And while that is a lower pressure, this still produces lots of shrapnel. So if we look at this situation on the bench top here, we see a lot of debris generated. Some of that is going to be bits of brass and probably also pieces of the cartridge container that is there on the bench top. A lot of times those cartridge cases have some kind of plastic insert that helps organize the ammunition. So all of that is going to be basically flung around. A really quick break, I wanted to remind you that there is an affiliates page listed in the description box down below where you can take advantage of great deals on products that I stand behind, including our contiguous channel sponsor, PowerTac flashlights. They do everything from standard size EDC lights to pocket suns, so whatever it is that you're after, but if flashlights aren't your gag, then we have everything over there from gun oil to armor. So if you want an opportunity to support the channel indirectly through purchases that you are going to make anyway, then there it is, and thank you very much. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, primary projectiles here would be anything that would be directly attached to the original piece of ammunition. So the bullet, the cartridge casing, fragments, and if the primer blew out, that as well. I'm going to say that we can focus predominantly on the cartridge casing fragments. Those are going to be relatively high energy compared to everything else that we're talking about. And I would say that if they hit him directly in the eye, that would be a problem, or if they got him in any of the soft bits of his neck here, they're going to be high enough energy to potentially do some damage to those, and you might get a bleeder. Now, if we look at his stance, he was standing there shooting a pistol, and I can't tell where the cartridge case is in relative orientation to his person, but he likely got some shielding from his forearms, has generated a meat shield, if you will. Secondary projectiles would be the bits of plastic from the cartridge box that we discussed earlier, as well as all of the other cartridges that were around that cartridge that went off. Now, those are going to be relatively low energy because they're going to be pretty heavy in relative comparison to everything else that we're talking about. So again, unless he wasn't wearing eye protection, then he probably had nothing to worry about on those ones. I do want to take an opportunity to point out that the shooter maintained expert gun handling skills and give him praise there, because I can tell you that I have had so many guns pointed at my face by gun bunnies that freaked out about just getting a little bit of brass down their shirt and burning their plastic bits. If they had been present for something like this, they would have turned into them fainting sheep that you see. Now, I mentioned previously that I have a second documented instance of this occurring. From the reaction of the gentleman in the video, maybe you could say that he was injured minorly, probably, but it could have also simply been the reaction to the stimulus as well. He could have just been surprised. I think the major takeaway here is to always wear your personal protective equipment. And for your face, in addition to your hearing protection, what that means is not only glasses. If you use eyeglasses for seeing, they are not sufficient unless they are actually a pair of safety glasses. Whatever glasses you have on your face, aviators will not cut it. Need to have side shields on them to keep those pieces of brass that go places that we don't want them to go from bouncing and coming back. A really good thing that you can do to reduce that incidence is wear a ball cap like this, so that you create a junction between that eye protection and this region above your head, so that it can't get you from that angle as well. I would guess that from this there might be some reaction from some establishments out there that say patrons have to either have a specified loading area to load their magazines, or they have to cover their ammunition, or they might put things there that allow you to put your ammo in so that this doesn't happen again. I don't really think that that's necessary whatsoever. I've handled millions of rounds of ammunition in my career, and until I started doing this, I didn't think that this was even possible. And we have 2 documented cases of it occurring, but that's still not a whole lot. I can tell you that based on what I saw in this video, I mistreat ammunition on a regular basis. I'm not going to change a whole lot here. I think that the only thing I'll probably do is, instead of throwing random pieces of ammunition into my random ammo collection bucket, you know how it is. You come in from the range, you got stuff stuffed in your pockets, in your bags and stuff like that. I have a bucket that I just throw the random stuff in and sort later. I'll probably be a little bit more ginger with it than I have been in the past, to just chucking in it from across the room. Probably is how that's going to go. But other than that, I don't think that this is going to affect my day-to-day operations, and I don't think it should impact others as well. But just know that this is a quirky thing that apparently is a thing.